Carson, Leno, Fallon. Now, it's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in studio today, about to have a conversation with the Executive Vice President of Chateau Angelus, Yves de Launay. Look, I already said it wrong already.
It's perfect. Good morning.
Perfect.
Thank you for having me, Paul.
We'll finish introductions in a minute. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you hang out for podcasting. Have a listen to a show I just released with Jerry Eisterholt. This guy must be nuts. He's trying to bring back the indigenous wine grapes of America. And many people say there weren't any, and there weren't actually any Vitis vinifera grapes, but these are Vitis lambrusca grapes. He's got about a dozen that he has repropagated in making wine, and I'm waiting for my first shipment to find out what it's all about. But a great conversation, including the Smithsonian Institute looking into their wines. Also, I just re-released a podcast with my father, Paul Callum Carrion Sr., the founder of the direct-to-consumer market in America in 1972, started out of the wine shop in Palos Verdes Estates. He's an immigrant from Cairo, and you'll hear the story about how he got here and how he came up with this idea to ship wine to your door. But now while we're here to have a conversation with Yves. Welcome to the show again.
Thank you very much, Paul. Pleasure to be here today.
This is fascinating. And I have to do a shout out to Sebastian at Duclos, premier importer of Bordeaux and French wines. Always kind and generous to invite me to the luncheons and meet folks like you and taste wines that otherwise I wouldn't see every day. So I appreciate that.
Thank you to Duclos, who's actually been a great partner and friends too of Chateau Angelus for a long time.
You live in New York.
I do live in New York.
Yeah, but you don't. Your accent's not New York.
No.
So, but I was doing a little research on your history. You were in luxury goods, and I want to talk that a little bit because it's an interesting part of our industry. And I've been sort of trying to wrestle with this, having sold wines that typically sold for $15 or $20. Okay, so a totally different market than what you're talking about. But there seems to be this widening separation between the collector, maybe the people that buy Chateau Angelus, and the people on the internet trying to find wines. How does Angelus work with that? How are you positioning it in America with?
Well, Angelus is obviously a very fine wine, considered as one of the top Bordeaux and wine and Saint-Emilion. Not widely distributed. It's a fairly small allocated production at the end. So obviously it caters to a much smaller group worldwide, and the rarity obviously is what makes the price that you were mentioning.
So you mentioned yesterday during your seminar that you're making 90,000 bottles.
Correct.
Which is, man, and I can't even believe everything I used to do in my life was base 12. Everything was in 12s. A case of wine is 12. Everything was 12. I knew all the parameters, all the permutations of 12, but 90,000 is not a large amount, particularly for a wine.
It's quite limited. I mean, if you want to put it in cases of 12, that's about 8,000 cases, which is, and that's pretty much...
for the whole world.
For the whole world, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not that much. And obviously that varies depending on the year and the harvest. Some years are a bit, more, some years are less. But yeah, it's a fairly rather small production at the end of the Grand Vin.
And you mentioned, I mean, for the listeners, the Grand Vin is the premium brand, the name label, the Chateau Angelus label, because we'll talk about some of the other brands that are made from the winery as well that are very good. But you mentioned that some of the other brands like Lafite, Mouton, and Le Haut-Briand, these larger, they actually make 300,000 bottles?
About that.
Wow.
The production of some of the first growth on the left bank actually much, much higher than Angelus.
That's interesting because for the listeners, again, left bank, was it left of the Don or left of the Gironde?
Yes, Gironde.
And then on the right bank, the other side. And we'll talk about the differences a little bit for the listeners, but I find that fascinating that there's this large difference in the production between what would be the most famous houses in Bordeaux.
Generally speaking, the vineyards in Saint-Emilion, on the right bank, you have Saint-Emilion and Pomerol being obviously the most famous villages and appellations. The vineyards are quite small, generally speaking. Angelus with 30,000 hectares in Saint-Emilion is actually quite large for that specific region. That would be small compared to the vineyards on the left bank, which tends to be larger, generally speaking.
That, and thanks to Duclos again, we had a seminar a couple of weeks ago or last week with Chateau Lagrange, and he said something that I had not realized about the classification of 1855. And we'll talk about Saint-Emilion in a second. And that was that they classified the chateau and not the terroir, not necessarily the vineyards.
That's correct, yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and in Saint-Emilion, the classification of, was it
1955.
55.
That started, yeah. So way after the left, bank classification, which was 1855.
Right.
So pretty much 100 years later.
Well, that's a very nice celebration, 100 years.
It is. And then Saint-Emilion realized that also they needed to... So Saint-Emilion, the right bank, wasn't part of this classification, of 1855, which at the time was actually requested by Napoleon, for the Universal Exhibition. But the right bank has been forgotten in that classification, and that's why, later on, like a century after, pretty much, there was, the Saint-Emilion started its own classification, which was meant to be revised every 10 years. So not something rigid and something that can be reevaluated, periodically.
But I think that's, so I was trying to think of, and I didn't find the answer to this question, but I like talking about it, and that is, do you think that, there's a couple of questions from this. One is the marketing value of that, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the other is, in response to Napoleon III, I think, the nephew of the great general, that, hey, we were left out. I think it was the Negociants at the time that did that anyway. It was the most expensive wines of the district, and so the Saint-Emilion was left out of it. And that the district of Saint-Emilion actually is slightly different in that you do reevaluate every 10 years, and you do look at the terroir and this.
The criteria have evolved,
Yeah.
since it started, in 1955. So, but there's a number of criteria that have been used for this classification specifically.
It's kind of controversial.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, do you think it was done for marketing? I mean, like, hey, we're the bastard childs over here on the right bank because we're not part of the classification, and all those guys at the first growth and the third and fourth and fifth growth get to talk about that, and we don't. But in here you have a brand that's even more highly allocated and certainly as elegant and as pedigreed as your counterparts in the left bank. Was it a response to that? Like, we need to do the same kind of marketing?
I guess at the time that was the idea. Maybe whether it was marketing or just a need to kind of bring a little bit of clarity, for the end consumers to understand also, how to bring some kind of hierarchy within, all the different wines produced. Ultimately, there are a lot of different chateaus on the right bank. I think it's about 200, and obviously trying to give a little bit of a rational, using some specific criteria for the end consumer to really understand what, how everything kind of plays and form between each other.
It's really, in the consumer, let's talk about that for a second, the romance of Bordeaux.
Yeah.
I love it. I love talking about it. I love telling my friends about it, pouring it. I think I mentioned yesterday, we had a dinner party the other night for a young winemaker out of the base of the Pyrenees and the Provence. And I got to open wines that otherwise I wouldn't open. But I never understood the collector mentality. And this is where we're going to get into your career here. Because I was selling wines for $20. It was really value oriented. My job was to taste as much as I could, not a bad job, and find the best value in America based on that criteria. But now that I have these vintages at my home, I'm like, God, if I open it, I don't have it anymore. And I want to collect this stuff, and I want to put it in my display. And you should see my cellar, and you can see the labels and the lighting, and there's Pichon Longueville there, and there's Lafite, and I feel proud of this. But I've got to force myself to open them and drink them, no?
I think, yes, it's actually, there's a lot of enjoyment to build a collection and to be able to simply, watch it, see it evolving, starting to get some older vintages. There's a lot of enjoyment and pride, to be able to build this collection. What I found specifically in the US is all the collectors actually have two. There's a common denominator between all the collectors. The first one is they're obviously very passionate. They love it. Wine is a constant search for, there's always something new in wine. There's a new vintage. There's a new, the chateau evolves. So there's a lot of knowledge that, you acquire over time. So it really keeps you busy to just get a chance to understand, know, test these different, options that you have in a way. But the second thing that I always found, and specifically in the US, is in addition to the passion, the generosity has always been a characteristic of people who love wine.
That's interesting.
Wine is part of the art of living. It's part of sharing. It's part of conviviality. It's part of, the food and the wine, pairing together. And that's one of the simple pleasure of life. It brings people together. And I think that's something that, I believe, in addition to having the pleasure of having the wine, the pleasure of sharing it, and create, a moment when you do it, create a memory, is very rewarding. And the thing sometimes that you can do, I've done it myself, to be honest. Some great bottle of wines that, like you, I was very proud to have, and opening it with some people and having them sometimes, whether they were knowledgeable or not, sharing it with some friends or families, and creating this experience that, together, then I keep the bottle empty.
Yes.
And I know exactly, it reminds me the time, the moment, the emotion that we shared at that time. And I think that's the beauty of wine as well.
So I think that is
opening the wine.
Well, yeah, and actually it's very funny. And my friends they're learning Bordeaux now. They like it, so I opened but I wanted to share with the young Frenchman a bottle of Napa's finest, so to speak. And so I opened a bottle of 100 Acre, and I had never opened it. I had forgotten what I paid for it. I just got an allocation, so I just took it. And one of our friends who loves Cabernet, she's like, "Oh, this is really good." And I said, well, then I looked at Wine Search and saw that it was like $700.
Wine could be seen also, as you touched a little bit upon that as well earlier, but it can be seen, as a collector, you can also see it as an investment.
Right.
And it's true that sometimes, when you buy wine, you forget about it, you age it, you put it in your cellar, and it can prove to be a very good investment, and the value can significantly increase over time. And it's been true for many different wines, whether it's in Bordeaux or Angelus is one example, but obviously not the only one, or other regions as well.
But I can tell you, the value as a friend went up when I showed her how much that wine cost.
I'm sure you enjoyed it.
Well, you must really like me. You poured this $1 bottle of wine. Well, let's talk about that, because consumerism, post-COVID, is radically different and misunderstood by most wine companies. There are many companies in America that are struggling. There's a well-known public company whose stock went from $13 to 50 cents, and prolific makers of good wine in America. People are shopping online. They're looking for their best value. And my comment always is, going back to your experiential comment, which wine is an experience, is that, hey, I bought this for $3 on the internet. That's not an experience, right? That's just the price. How has that shifted for you in the luxury market of wine? Have you seen a difference, or it's because that collector is still collecting?
Ultimately, a luxury product, whether it's wine or a watch or a car or, any luxury product, have a few things in common. The craftsmanship quite often is one thing. Mm-hmm. And quite often also the rarity is another criteria which is important. So obviously, when you have an exceptional product and wine, for instance, then and you have a very limited amount of this wine. We were talking about 90,000 bottles for Angelus. It's really not that much on the, on the scale of the world, and the billions of people potentially, could access it. So obviously that creates the value of it, to the rarity, the scarcity that you have. In addition, obviously, to the criteria, rational criteria of craftsmanship and all the history, the legacy that you can have. All of that, contribute to the value of the wine, obviously, the just a simple rule of supply and demand that kicks in and makes the value going up.
So you came from the luxury market. You were at LVMH, no?
Yes.
Right? And what were you working on? What product were you selling then?
Actually, I was
promoting.
Part of LVMH actually was working with the Moet Hennessy portfolio, so a beautiful collection of champagne, spirits, and then wine as well. So very fortunate to work with this exceptional product and pretty much giving access to clients, collectors,
right.
For those products.
But also were you in watches?
I also work for the Richemont Group and for their one of the flagship brand, which is Cartier, and so same concept. Really offering exceptional product timepieces, and not only timepieces in fact, but different categories within this brand, because the brand obviously becomes like the umbrella, if you want, and it's this search for excellence really applies for every category, whether it's an accessory, a fragrance, eyewear. So yeah, that's something also I've done in the past.
So how does one get into the segment? Like let's just take luxury goods total. Like we're gonna go to Monaco for the Grand Prix, and that's all about, right? That's all about brands and just I just love it. This is the third time, but how does one gravitate towards that? How did you get started in the luxury sector?
It's happened naturally. We see quite often. My background was I'm an agronomist originally, so I always specialized in viticulture and enology, and very quickly I started to work on some on Bordeaux wines, in fact, and creating some campaign for Bordeaux, generic Bordeaux, back to a long time ago, and then working in Champagne, and Champagne obviously is considered as part of the premium, ultra premium luxury category, within wine and spirits, and then from there moved to cognac and working also with some very high end cognac.
I saw that Louis XIII.
Yes, I had the privilege to be in charge of this wonderful
amazing. Cognac
for quite a few years, and it's been a lot of fun, a lot of work, a lot of fun as well. But always this exceptional, product and brands, and that's part of something larger than us, really. It's always part of a legacy, and you just contribute, to bring and make sure that you bring your contribution to. Contribute to make them, exceptional, and convey this message and with the larger audience.
Well, I mean, it makes a ton of sense that somebody with your background moving across those categories and sectors of the luxury market, because it is a certain buyer, a consumer, a certain value set that consumer may have as opposed to the regular consumer, so to speak, and that you need to elevate that experience for them as well. In the world of marketing today, watches have done incredibly well during this post-COVID world and COVID, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I suppose wine too, but are there new challenges ahead with the generations that are behind, let's say me, I'm a baby boomer, the millennials, the Gen Xs, the Gen Zs? Are there challenges to the luxury market in this group? Or we still have?
I wouldn't say so. I think obviously, everyone is going through a journey, and if you, Paul, if you look at what you were, enjoying when you were 20, and then at 30 true. And 40 and later, your taste, your appreciation, your wallet also obviously change. And that's, I think the role of the different brand or chateau, as far as we are concerned, is really to make sure that we don't left anyone behind and get a chance, for different groups and younger demographic also to kind of give them a sense of, of what we're doing. They're in fact and you mentioned it briefly before, but in fact within the Angelus world, we have different wines. We have the Grand Vin, obviously, which is really the ultimate wine that we produce. But you have also a lot of very, very good wines, at the with different characteristics, different styles, different price as well. And you can start, approaching the universe of Angelus at a very reasonable price. I'm thinking of a wine like Tempo, for instance, which is, a Bordeaux appellation. It's a wine that typically you can find between $25 and $30, in retail. It's a one that is done with the same attention, same care, different, obviously, blend, different aging. I mean, there's some differences, obviously. But it's a wine that ultimately, gives you a first step to that universe. And then from there, you have different other wines, like one called Number 3, which has more complexity, different blend, and that's at a price point which is a little bit higher, between $80 and $100, usually speaking. So, part of your journey, that's something that you can treat yourself. And then you have what we call the second wine, Carillon. Again, a very, made in Saint-Émilion and a beautiful wine on its own. And that's also one step, higher on your way to Angelus. So I think, even within our chateau, you have a journey that you can have. And I think everyone has its own journey. And, whether it's the wine that you're drinking in terms of color, you can start with some rosé or white and then go red and then enjoy all of them. And then moving along through different regions and types of varietal. And that's, and that's fine. I think when you start getting interested, when you start having the bug, then you really want to know more, you want to test more, and then you also select and invest probably differently,
You since you said what you drank when you were 20, the picture behind you is my father's liquor store, and he had very cheap booze as part of his repertoire. Actually, he bought that shop in 1969, and one of the Judgment of Paris winners, the Barrett family, lived down the street. They were close friends of my father, and he turned that wine shop into one of the premier wine shops in Los Angeles, top 5 in the 70s. And so that's where we got started doing this. But I'm glad you said that, because I've been having a hard time defining my position, and I say this, and I said it the other day to Pauline Vicard of the Arani Global Group, which is a fine wine think tank, and that is, I think every generation eventually lands on an Angelus type wine. It doesn't have to be that brand, but that they realize as they go up and grow and mature and their palate changes. And you said it already. White Zinfandel for California in 1974 was that entry-level wine. Matus, Lancers, all those were entry-level wines. Maybe there's an entry-level Bordeaux's, a Mouton Cadet or something like that you taste, you go, oh, this is kind of interesting. And then you realize, hey, maybe it's not so interesting. Maybe Angelus is, more interesting.
Maybe something else. And that's how, you get progressively try to explore, understand also what you like and what you don't like. And also, I believe your palate also is, evolving as well and getting, I don't want to say educated, because it's very subjective. Everyone has the right to like something different. But your palate evolves, and then you might want something a bit more complex, a bit more full body sometimes, or a bit more elegant on the other way. So it's really a very personal journey, I think.
So let's say that's the case, and I think it is. I think wine's been around, more 6,000, 9,000, who knows, some number, 10,000 years that we've enjoyed wine. So I don't think that's going away in that regard. And then we have these consumer blips. I call them blips. There's like we said, Lancers and White Zinfandel and who knows what else. Now there's Stella Rosa. I was talking to somebody the other day that during Christmas, the number one SKU for the Nielsen rating in wine was a Stella Rosa chili pineapple flavored Moscato. Now that's disgusting, right?
Some people might like it.
To
I
my
guess
friends-
if it's
to my
the
friends-
number one, some people must like it.
To my friends, the Ribolis who own the winery, whatever. So I just say that tongue in cheek. But eventually, like we just said, they land on a particular bottle of wine that piques their interest and they change. But consumerism is different. And we go through these packaging changes, like, for instance, canning now, and there's Tetra Paks, and there's low alcohol and no alcohol, and all these things kind of come and go generationally. But eventually, the idea of an Angelus brand sort of settles in, or a Lafite, or a high-end Napa. How do you maintain this brand equity? Does it need to shift with generations, or is Angelus, you're trying to maintain what that expression is supposed to be, balancing with consumerism? Is there a problem? Is it a headache, or is it just
No, it's not a headache, and you have to remember that Angelus is family owned, and obviously we have 8 generations that have been passing the torch from one generation to the other one. Today we have the 8th generation with Stéphanie Debois, the current owner, who joined the property in 2012, and really, ultimately, there is a know-how, and expertise, a search also for excellence that have been perpetuated, from generation to generation, and everyone bringing their own contribution to, what Angelus is today. And certainly, Stéphanie is actually doing that as well. It's deeply anchored, in some roots that have been there for a long time. But at the same time, it also has to live with its own, time and modernity. It's not something which is stuck in time. In the case of Stéphanie, and the new direction and vision that she gives to the chateau, she certainly keep all of that in mind. All this heritage that she has, and how she can, she wants to pass it, to the next generation. She has 2 young children as well, in a better place than what she found when she had it, and it was really obviously at a pretty in a very, very good situation. But so she's really bringing this her own contribution. She has made some different I want to say a good way to do it is different ways to make it contemporary. With some different presentation, like in 2012, for instance. When Stéphanie arrived in 2012 was a very important year for Angelus. It was the year when she arrived and took over, from her dad, which was obviously quite important. Her dad was already, within the chateau and running it and making the wine for over, for almost 30 years. He's still making the wine today, by the way, and he's quite talented at that. But so it's also the year when Angelus was elevated, actually, and we talked about it before, in the classification of Saint-Emilion, was elevated in Grand Cru Classee A, with a very small elitist group of 4 different chateaus, with the Chateau Cheval Blanc, Ozone, and at that time, both Chateau Angelus and Chateau Pavie also got, were part of this small group. So to mark this milestone and this change of generation and this, the presentation was different. And that instead of having the traditional label of Angelus, there was no label. And so there was the bottle, and everything was engraved in gold on the bottle. So quite a striking, presentation.
Yeah.
Also introducing some limited edition. Angelus was selected in one of the James Bond movie, and so
I read that.
And so there was a special also presentation that was created for that, for that occasion. Also, referring to the tradition of Angelus and more especially the grandmother of Stéphanie, who was called Elisabeth Boucher. And Boucher, by the way, means Cabernet Franc in
Boucher, we use it
in Bordeaux.
Yes.
there's one actually parcel that's and one wine that's very unique. It's 100% Cabernet Franc, and it's called Hommage à Elisabeth Boucher. The different, very limited 100 cases, so 1,200 bottles, and that's a wine obviously that's been released and presented in a very different way. So that's ways to bring relevance in different ways and allowing also to share what's the history and what the stories are simply about the chateau, the family, and its heritage.
It's always about the story.
Stories are very important.
It's so important.
The most important.
You said Boucher. That brings full circle. One of the wines I stocked in that wine shop right there when I was a kid was Cabernet Boucher from Freemark Abbey. Didn't know the term meant Cabernet Franc. That's pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, and Cabernet Franc is something which is, without being too technical, but Cabernet Franc is really part of the heritage and DNA of Angelus. It's obviously a varietal that you find on the right bank. And Angelus has always taken has a pretty bold decision in terms of vineyards to have a very high proportion of Cabernet Franc, because we do believe that Cabernet Franc brings a lot of elegance, finesse, fraîcheur, and also this ability to age for quite a long time.
Some structure.
We almost have 50% in the structure, obviously. We have almost 50% of our vineyard, which is Cabernet Franc, which is quite high.
Well, I noticed the Grand Vin the other day, there were a couple of vintages that was 50-50.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we're going back to the story. Is it unusual in Bordeaux these days? I mean, I know there's been a lot of corporate moves, particularly post-'70s when Bordeaux had troubles and there were some inexpensive properties. Is eighth generation pretty rare?
It's very rare, and it's an exception within the first growth. It's really an exception. To have this eighth generation, almost 250 years, within the same family is quite unique and quite exceptional. As you said, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, Bordeaux attracted a lot of, investors and conglomerate now that actually who owns some of these chateaux. So obviously the philosophy is quite different. They've done a lot of great things, by the way, for these chateaux that they, acquired. But obviously it's a slightly different when it's, your own family, your own heritage, and when you want to pass it to the next generation versus, having obviously like a corporation owning the chateau.
Can you and I buy a winery today in Bordeaux and even think we're going to make any money based on the prices of the land and the cost of manufacturing?
I think most of quite often. I mean, the main reason why people are buying properties in Bordeaux, it goes back to the passion. They want. There's a lot of pride, a lot of personal satisfaction to acquire a chateau. So it's not a small investment, more especially in Bordeaux, depending where you go. There are not a lot of obviously chateaux available for sale, but you also have actually a lot of different regions within Bordeaux which are not necessarily today at least as well known as Saint-Emilion or even Pomerol on our left bank, which can be actually quite interesting in producing amazing wine. I'm thinking of Côte de Castillon. In fact, Côte de Castillon, a lot of we have a significant amount of wine and grapes and vineyards ultimately that come from that region for Tempo, wine Tempo.
Oh, really? Okay.
Which I was mentioning before, and that terroir are wonderful. You can find some clay, the famous clay that you would really want for Merlot, and the blue clay. But you find also some limestone, soil, and all of that, produce the right, the great terroir, in addition to everything, the exposition to the sun and so on. But it's those regions, I suspect, will grow or will, develop and be better known in the future. And who knows, maybe you can get
maybe we can do it
chateau
together.
there. And we can make wine there together.
It's impossible in Napa Valley. I mean, there. Even if we were just going to start a brand, we would have to pay $8,000 a ton, maybe $10,000 a ton, for pedigreed grapes, and that means automatically you're at $150 a bottle. more just to maybe break even. And so I just wondered if we could. Well, we're going to come in May. Okay, we're going to be in Bordeaux in May. And maybe there's a for sale sign somewhere.
Well, not that Angelus. I wouldn't think so. But you're certainly very welcome. And I hope you're going to come. And you're officially invited.
Well,
and we can obviously share with you. I don't know if you've ever been, Paul, to Angelus.
I've not. No.
But so yes, it will be great for you to see the property, because it's a beautiful chateau surrounded by the vineyards. This natural amphitheater, and
I love the bell story. Tell the listeners about the bells, because I read about it after you told the story yesterday, and I thought, France was quite was a Catholic by religion. In fact, I had a French chef on the show last week, Frederic Castan, who's in America, but he grew up in Avignon, and he considered himself a devout Catholic, which is great. But Avignon was, that's what you did every Sunday. Is it like that in Saint-Emilion? Now we have this amphitheater and the bells are ringing. Is there any?
You still hear the bells ringing in the church every Sunday, actually even more. But the story actually about Angelus and the name come from is quite an interesting one, in fact. Angelus was a prayer from the 15th century. It's a prayer that had to be, so it was a Catholic prayer requested by the Pope at the time. And that was 3 times a day. So you had to pray at 7 o'clock in the morning, at noon, and at 7 o'clock at night. And so when that happened, all the bells were ringing in the church within France. It happens that the vineyards of Angelus is this natural amphitheater I was just mentioning, and so it's surrounded by 3 different villages with 3 churches, because every village has a church in France, and so you could, when you are in the vineyard, you can hear these 3 churches ringing the bell at the same time, and so the worker in the vineyard could hear that, and that's where the name came from, and that's also why on our label you have this bell that very unique and the clear identification that is Angelus bottle.
So throughout the town, this village Saint-Emilion, you hear these bells.
Exactly.
Oh, that in itself is worth just the trip, just the experience of that.
I really, whenever you come, I really encourage you to first come to obviously Angelus, but also to visit Saint-Emilion. Beautiful village of the 13th century, gorgeous, and you will fall in love with that village. I can assure you.
We'll be there. I have friends in tow, clients in tow. We start in Piemonte. Then we end up in Monaco for the race, down to Bordeaux for a few days, back to Paris, and then we want to do day trips, Champagne, Normandy, that kind of thing.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
Huh?
Sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun. My friend just purchased a winery, well, maybe it's been 2 years now, in Le Long de Pomerol, a Chignot. And he was saying, look, this has been a lot of work to get recognition, to get it into the restaurants, to get it into the shops in Paris, to do the things it takes to run a business of wine. And it's not automatic. We don't automatically place it on the shelf. You have to work really hard to get this done and then find the export markets. How is Angelus in the rest of the world? Asians, do the Asian market, like the Japanese and Chinese, or?
Angelus is very, very, very well known in Asia. Historically, it's always been a very a strong name for the Asian in the different Asian markets. But it's really you can really find it everywhere, and obviously you always have like the connoisseur. But I don't necessarily like this term, but the people who are really into the wine, who obviously know what it stands for, and then you have the general, more the general public, and some of, and there's a lot of education to do to make sure that, we just communicate who we are, what we do, and share also, when we can, our wines.
And where does it take you? All over the world?
All over the world.
Yeah.
We do that everywhere. We actually, Angelus has the characteristic to have different people in different markets and really, making sure that we convey this message, of what the chateau is, the search of excellence, the quality of the wine, and making sure that, we can do it with all the different groups, from the trade, the distribution, the retailers, the restaurants, and ultimately, the end consumer as well. And
I think we got to wrap this up. I know you have an appointment to get to, so we'll wrap it up now. But I think in the world of wine today, after the internet and social networking, and like just in the Christmas season alone in America, or Los Angeles even, there were 5 or 6 brand new wine clubs announced on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and all that. And I'm thinking, wow, the messaging that people are hearing about wine every day, thousands of touch points that they're seeing. And I think the industry is going back to, well, this patch, Les Amis de Vin. This is my dad's club in the 70s. They'd have dinners. They would have the women wear their mink coats, and they'd have Robert Mondavi speak, and they'd have the famous, Michael Broadbent and Harry Waugh. These guys would come and speak to this people to hear. And I think that's where you're at. I think that's where the industry is at, to get the stories back on the street.
I think it's great. I think it's great that people are still interested. They still want to learn. They want to listen to these stories that we were mentioning, and it's our role to kind of open the eyes when we can, also on wine. And wine can be complicated. There's a lot of different regions, a lot of different type of wine. There's and then even within one chateaus, you have a lot of different vintage. And it's complicated, and it's our role to kind of simplify it if we can, and really expose and share our stories with as many people as we can. And obviously it's limited, and that's why we very honored to be part of your wine talk, Paul.
Well, thank you.
Because that's an easy way for us to share our stories with a larger group, instead of doing it one by one, and being able to reach and share our story with a larger group.
Well, thank you for sharing it today. We're just picked up in Denver, and in where it looks like we're Washington, D.C. and California. We're already in Atlanta. Besides the podcast distribution through Spotify and all that, these are radio stations that are picking up the show. And so your story's being told. That's great. It's such a pleasure to meet you yesterday and today and have you here. And I know you've got a busy schedule today. So thank you for taking the time and visiting with us today.
Thank you very much, Paul, and look forward to welcoming you actually in a couple of months in
That's right.
in Saint-Émilion at Angelus.
Very good. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to Wine Talks with Paul Kalamkarian. Don't forget to subscribe, because there's more great interviews on their way. Folks, have a great time out there in the wine world. Cheers.